What's up you guys, it's Sophie, and today I'm going to be talking about interviews. Last week I put up a video about internships and kind of balancing college and interning, and now I wanted to talk about interviews and how you actually get your internship slash a job. I did post a video like how to get your dream internship a while ago, and I thought I would just do a little bit of like an updated, here's how to do really well on an interview either for a job or an internship, since I found that those are pretty similar now that I'm interviewing for full-time jobs. They're pretty similar to internship interviews, but usually a little longer. So I thought I would talk through kind of all of my tips for interviews, and let's just get started. Don't know what that was. So first, to state the obvious, if you're going for an in-person interview, print at least 3 copies of your resume, bring them in a nice folder. I usually bring them, I have mine right here, I bring them in like a folder like this, and I'm always prepared with extra copies. You never know who might ask you for a copy of yours. I've been in interviews where they already have a printed copy, so you don't even need to give yours in, but even the copy they might have might be outdated. If you applied, say, a month ago and you've updated your resume, they might pull out the printed copy and you can say, oh, here I have an updated version. Or I've been in interviews where they've actually had like the HR person, the person who would be my boss, the person who's their boss, all 3 of them want a copy of your resume, and then there you go, that's 3 right there, and you might even want one to keep for yourself to reference. So I usually recommend bringing 3 or 4 copies to an in-person interview, even if you think you might not need them. You never know if they're going to want a new updated copy, or they might not print it out themselves, so it's really helpful to bring it. Obviously, tip number 2, show up early. It's like my biggest pet peeve to be late to things, and usually if I have an interview, say I have an interview scheduled for like 11, I'll show up at like 10:40. Sometimes the check-in process takes a few minutes. If you're at a big company, there might be like a little bit of a wait or something like that, and people usually appreciate when you show up early for things. Sometimes I've had interviews where they say make sure you show up 15 minutes early, and then in that case I'll usually show up like even more than 15 minutes early. So, you know, obviously they might tell you, but it's always better to be early, and especially if you're like taking a subway or in a rush or something, you never know, like you should leave yourself a lot of time to get there. My next tip is to be prepared to answer the question, tell me about yourself. I think it's everybody's least favorite interview question, and I don't think I've ever had an interview where they haven't asked me that question. My typical response is to kind of go through the highlights on my resume, so I'll say that I'm a student at NYU, I'll say my major and my minor, when I'm graduating, as well as kind of the highlights on my resume that relate directly to that job. So I'll talk about kind of 3 pinpoints. I won't go into too much detail, but kind of talking about my passions, my interests, what I'm doing right now, and how that relates to the job. And, you know, don't go rambling on about your entire resume that whole time, because they will go more into depth and ask you more questions, but just talk about kind of your interests and your passions and your hobbies, you know, not just this is my last internship, but kind of a more well-rounded perspective of yourself. Next, as somebody who is a little bit more introverted and shy, I really hate meeting new people, so I struggle with this, but you should make sure that you are smiling, remaining, you know, engaged in the conversation, looking the person in the eye, things like that. Those are things that I really struggle with, and I've kind of had to practice as I've done more and more interviews, but I think people really appreciate when you show that you're listening to what they're saying, you're taking in that information, you're responding to it, things like that, that seem like simple, but when you're stressed and you're in a job interview, you might kind of forget those normal everyday conversation habits, and you should really try to keep this conversational, which is kind of another tip. Make sure you're having a conversation and not necessarily a question and answer session. So even though they're going to be asking you questions, you're going to be asking them questions, you should try to have a conversation. You shouldn't just like answer their question and then wait for them to ask a new one. You know, try to talk to them like they're a real human, because they are a real human and they're not just like some scary HR person or boss person. So try to keep everything conversational. Going off of that, make sure you have a ton of questions prepared. I usually try to have at least 5 questions prepared for every interview I go on. Sometimes new ones pop up in my head when, you know, we're in the process of talking, but I try to have at least 5 prepared, and usually about 3 of them are standard across the board. So I'll go through what questions I usually ask. So first question I always ask, what are the day-to-day duties of the role? Sometimes they would have already talked about that, and then I'll ask a more specific question about the day-to-day responsibilities, but I always ask about the day-to-day responsibilities, and usually an HR manager might not know the answer to that, and you'll have to wait for a second interview, but if you're speaking with somebody who will be your boss, obviously they'll be able to talk very in depth about that. Another one that I always ask that I feel like applies to all jobs is, what is your favorite part about working here? They can tell you a little bit about the office environment, you'll be able to know why they like working for that company, and you know, you can think of a job interview not only as you trying to sell yourself, but the company is trying to sell themselves to you. They want to hire you, they want you to work there, and obviously you're probably applying to other positions that you're going to be considering, so they're going to want to talk really highly about their job, and then you can get to learn more about kind of what they do, why they like working there, and things like that. So all the other questions I usually ask are sometimes more related to what I'm doing. So right now I'm interviewing for a lot of social media positions. So I'll ask them about what platforms they use, what platforms they're looking to grow on, what they're expecting from this new position in terms of platform growth. I'll ask how they handle posting on overnight and weekend. If it's a large company, they usually maybe will schedule that ahead. They might have somebody working overnight. They might have somebody weekend. They might use a certain scheduling tool. I'm used to certain scheduling tools. I can tell them about my experience with that. I will also ask kind of who I'm going to be working with, how many people I'm working with, what's the division of labor like, how does the social team interact with editorial, interact with the video team, interact with the marketing team, how is there a lot of company collaboration, what's the office like, things like that. Kind of, I guess, are more tailored to what I'm doing, but obviously you can ask, that applies to anything. If you're in the computer programming, you can ask what languages they use and, I don't know, what programs they use and what applications and what they're expecting from you in terms of, what you can learn from them, but also what you need to bring to the table, things like that. So obviously every job you should have kind of a set of standard questions and then also a set of tailored questions that might be more specific to that company. 2 more tips. This is a random one. I probably should have put more at the beginning, but if it is a Skype interview, make sure you are dressed nice and also your background is clean. You want to make sure, if you're sitting at a desk, the bed behind you is made and there's not a lot of clutter and things like that. It just shows that you are professional and have kind of prepared for the interview, because even though it is in the comfort of your own home, you should still look nice, put on a nice blouse or blazer or whatever, a nice dress shirt, and make sure you are looking as professional as you would if this was an in-person interview. And my last tip is to not be afraid to talk about your accomplishments and what you are good at. I think a lot of people are kind of not worried about, but maybe they don't like to talk about themselves and what they've done and their accomplishments and things like that. And those are the kinds of things that people who are interviewing you are looking to hear. They need to know what you're good at. They need to know your strengths, your weaknesses, and you should be willing to talk about, like, if you've done some amazing thing, like, don't shy away from talking about that just because you don't want to seem cocky or whatever. They need to see that you have skills in the area that you're applying for the job of, so you need to be able, like, to show off and, prove that you are worthy of the job. So don't be afraid to talk about your accomplishments and all of your skills and everything that you bring to the table in terms of how you can help the company. Those are all of my interview tips. If you have any more, feel free to leave them in the comments below, because I'm currently going through a lot of job interviews, and yeah, feel free to leave me any comments and I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!